Be sure and check our videos each week. We do have quite a few that watch, or a good number that watch each week. It's worth us to continue. So if you're ever sick, you can always watch. Be sure and share these with them as well. Today we continue all about Jesus walking on water. From Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. But my question to you, would you ever try to walk on water? Would you ever try to walk on water? I mean, really walk on water. I'm not talking about walking on some hidden rocks or something like that. I mean, really try to walk on water. You're probably thinking, John, you're out of your ever-loving mind if you think I'm going to do that. I'm too old. I'm out of shape. I can barely walk, much less propel myself across water. Are you kidding me? I am not going to swim with sharks, snakes, or brim for that matter, and I know I'm not going to walk. Somebody'd say, I can't swim and I'm not getting in the water if I can't swim. No way, no how. I am not getting in the water. Welcome to the world that every person who has ever lived on the face of this earth has resided, well, except for one. Every single one except for one. Peter, for a very short time. And then he fell back among the billions who have lived on the face of this earth. Good old impulsive Peter, for a very short time, may have been a few seconds, it may have been a minute, it might have been a couple of minutes. We don't know how long. But for a short time, he was different than the rest of us, because what did Peter do? He stepped out of the boat and he walked on water. But then, when the storms came and he saw himself start sinking, what did he say? Lord, save me. For years I've heard people criticize Peter because he took his eyes off Jesus and started to sink. But I've often asked those people, well, let me ask you, would you have stepped out? Would you have stepped out of the boat? Would you have done like Peter? Would you have stepped out of the boat? You see, that's what Peter did. He stepped out of the boat. So my question to you this morning is, will you walk on water with Jesus? I want you to read along with me in Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." If you were brought up in the church, chances are you learned this story when you were just, as the old saying goes, knee-high to a grasshopper. It's a story we've heard many times in our lives, and it's a story that sticks with us because it's so unusual. I mean, how many people have actually walked on water? Folks, that's unusual. Now, folks, some of you have been to my house, and you know that in our house, in our backyard, there's a shallow creek that cuts through our property. It's not deep at all, but after storms or extended rain, it does have its moments. But most of the time it's shallow. Yet before this summer, I had never seen it completely dry. There was always some water in it. And because there was some water in it, I quickly learned where the rocks were to get to the other side of my property. And I found out very quick, and I knew where those rocks were, and I could cross that creek, and nothing other than the bottom of my feet would get wet. Simply because I knew that. And I think everyone here can relate to that kind of thing. Many of you have also been to a beach. Perhaps it was the Atlantic Ocean. Perhaps it's the Gulf Coast of Alabama or Mississippi. Perhaps you've been to the Great Lakes. Something I usually do whenever I go to the beach is I will go out and I will walk out until the water is about this high on me. And regardless of when you go to the beach, there's going to be a little bit of a current somehow. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not as strong, but I'll go out to about this high, maybe a little higher, and then just try to walk back to the shore. And between the waves coming in and what sometimes we forget about is the current going back out, it's not an easy job. Has anyone here ever done something like that? You know what I'm talking about. It's not easy to do. And I'm not sure I'll ever try it again. But if you've ever been to the beach, you can probably relate. And I'm sure Peter could relate to that as well. So there are lessons that we can learn about being around the water. And there are some profound lessons, I think, that you see in this episode with Peter walking on the water. So I want to give you several of them, and they are in your outline this morning. But one of them is that true peace comes from being in the presence of Jesus. We oftentimes talk about finding peace in Jesus. That's a very common theme that we talk about in the church. We're coming up on the Christmas season. You'll hear it a lot. But in the turbulent world we live in, finding peace is something that's very desirable, isn't it? But oftentimes we take the world's view of peace and apply it to our souls. Sometimes we've often defined peace as simply the absence of conflict. Now, folks, in our world, there's always conflict. I don't care when it is. There's conflict in the world. If you read the newspaper or turn on the nightly news, you're going to see reports about a war in the Ukraine. You're going to see reports about a war and a tenuous ceasefire in Gaza. You're going to find about unrest, even here in the United States. You're going to find about all kinds of conflicts and turmoil in the world. Friday, for example, this news broke. It said federal authorities prevented a potential terrorist attack in Michigan, arresting multiple people involved in an alleged Halloween weekend plot, FBI Director Kash Patel announced on Friday, October 31st. Folks, we desire the absence of conflict, don't we? We don't like conflict. I don't, at least. No one wants to go through wars. No one wants to go through terrorist attacks. But you know something, that's not true peace, because there's always going to be conflict. Back in 1914, a major war had broken out in Europe, That was the Central Powers, who were Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, which is no longer around. They were at war against pretty much the rest of Europe, but it was mainly Great Britain and France and Soviet Union. It became known as World War I when the United States entered in 1917. But in 1914, the British author and a social commentator, H.G. Wells, published a book, and that book was entitled The War That Will End All War. And he was referring to what they were living in at that time, World War I. Eventually, World War I became known as the war to end all wars. And it ended in 1918. But you know what happened. If you follow history at all, you know what happened. 21 years later, what happened? Germany invaded Poland to start World War II. And during that war, which the United States entered in 1941, it's estimated that between 70 and 85 million people in the world died in World War II. It's estimated that there were between 22 and 30 million military deaths. And so you think, well, that did away with wars, but just think about the United States alone. I'm not talking about any other country. Just in the United States alone, since World War II, what have we had? We've had Korea. We've had Vietnam. We've had Iraq. We've had Afghanistan. And it hit home because my son-in-law was in Iraq 3 times. It hits home. But there have been other skirmishes. There's some that I'm sure are left out. Such like Grenada, Panama, Iran, Lebanon, all those things. We've seen unrest in our country. You don't think it's in our country, there was violence in our country, then you should have gone to downtown Louisville about 5 years ago when the riots were going on in Louisville. You see the riots going on even today. A couple of weeks ago, the protests about President Trump, they said the No Kings thing, and there was all kind of unrest. So what is going wrong? In the prophecies about Jesus, what is he sometimes referred to? The Prince of Peace. So what's gone wrong? I'll tell you what's gone wrong is we have sought peace without Jesus. We have sought peace based on human terms, and I will guarantee you that peace on human terms is going to fail. There's always going to be trouble in the world. Always. But you can still have peace individually. You can have peace because of your relationship with Jesus Christ. I think about this passage in Matthew chapter 14, and I only can think, wow, what a picture of life Matthew gives us. We've kind of skipped over some of the things in the life of Jesus as I've been trying to preach a lot of the episodes in his life. But after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus just wanted some solitude to pray. And so he sent his disciples in a boat across the Sea of Galilee. But I really believe that Jesus was setting this up. And this is just speculation, but this is just what I think. I believe he was setting it up to convey the truth that his blessings that he came to bestow on God's people were spiritual, not material. And it's clear that the disciples didn't really understand that. But note how Matthew set the scene. Look there at verse 23. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, and the wind was against them. They were experiencing a strong headwind. It might not have even been this major storm as far as we know, but you get a strong wind on the water, that's enough to really slow you down. And if you are rowing or you're dependent on a sail, this is really going to slow you down. Now, you think about it. The wind, it's going to throw you off course. When I lived in Lexington years ago, I lived in an apartment complex. It's still there. It's out on Richmond Road. It was just off Richmond Road, and there's a big lake there, right by that apartment complex. It's across from what used to be called the Lexington Mall. Now Southland Christian Church has a campus there, and a couple of other things. It's out there, and I lived there, and there was a lake out there, and there was a guy in the complex there that I knew, and he had a canoe, and he told me, he said, John, if you want to go out there and row that canoe for a workout, so it'll give you a good workout, you're welcome to do it. And yeah, he was right. It would give you a workout. But I remember one day taking it out when the wind was blowing. It wasn't stormy, the sun was shining. It was a nice day, but the wind was blowing. Big mistake. Because I quickly found out that water was moving faster than normal. And I was rowing that alone, rowing that canoe, and I remember it took all my might to keep that canoe under control. And what was usually about a 30-minute jump just across the lake and back, it took much, much longer. And folks, I was exhausted. And you know something? That's how life can be. We can have terrible storms in life, such as relationship issues, job issues, family issues, loss of loved ones, health issues. They can go on and on and on. I could stand up here all day listing things that can contribute to the storms in your life. It can be temporary money woes. It can be the effects of the government shutdown. It can be anything. But the bottom line is, regardless of who you are, you're going to be beaten by the storms of life somehow. Every one of us are going to be beaten, and we really don't know when it's going to hit. That's what's tough about life. We can be thrown off course, and we can be thinking we're not making any headway in our lives. And of course, we'll just think, well, if I could just get through the end of this year, or if I could just come up with some extra cash somewhere, if I could just lose 25 pounds, if I could just do this or I could just do that. And we're looking in the wrong place. Our focus must be upon Jesus Christ. A gospel singer that Stephanie and I know, named Jim Brady, we just talked to him about a month and a half ago. He penned a song in recent years that captures the essence of what I'm saying. He's got a catchy line in it, but the song is called Stand in the Storm. And it says, I'd rather stand in the storm with Jesus than stand in the sunshine alone. That pretty much sums it up. Amen. It sums it up. Because true peace comes from being where? In the presence of Jesus. But the second thing I want you to see this morning is that real faith requires stepping out of the boat. We like to be comfortable, don't we? At home last night, I was watching the ball games. Last night, it was all afternoon and last night, I think. I was watching the ball games, and I rarely got out of my recliner, laid back where I was comfortable. I was ready to go. In the car, I want to make sure that my seat is not too far forward, not too far back. I don't know when they started. An internet search says, though, that heated seats actually began in 1934 when Packard put some into some cars. But I never had one with heated seats until just the last few years. But in the same article that I read, though, the author talked about cars today, and he said, some vehicles combine heated seats with ventilated seats, providing warmth and cooling. The integration of heated seats with advanced technologies such as climate control systems and driver assistance features has further enhanced their convenience and functionality. Wow. We just bought a new car this summer. Stephanie's the one that drives it, and she told me this week she was so excited that she found out that it has a heated steering wheel. And she is looking forward to using that heated steering wheel in January. Now, there's nothing wrong with comfort. There's nothing wrong with. We have some amenities here in this building. You know, padded pews. We have a lot of amenities here. There's nothing wrong with comfort. But when I'm talking about comfort, I'm not talking about getting rid of those padded pews or taking out the heating or air conditioning system. I'm talking about comfort in our lives. What really matters. Have we become so comfortable with a nominal faith that we fail to really step out with Jesus Christ? I think about what happened on the Sea of Galilee that day. Yeah, there was a headwind and the disciples weren't making very good time. But think about it. Jesus started walking toward them, and they were terrified. They were terrified. Look at verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. The Greek word there that's translated cried out can also be translated scream. They were terrified about what was going on. And you know something? I would venture to say that everyone in here would do the same thing if you saw something walking towards you on water. You wouldn't know what was going on. But Jesus calmly identified himself and says, "Don't be afraid." Now you just think about it. They'd seen Jesus do some great things. He'd driven out demons. He'd healed the sick. He'd raised Jairus' dead daughter. He'd fed 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Those were impossible without God. But in my mind, at least, and you may disagree with me on this, in my mind, walking on water is something I couldn't even comprehend in any way. They had seen Jesus before as a normal, air-breathing human being, albeit one with supernatural powers. But now, Jesus is showing he's even more. These disciples had never studied Newton's law, but they knew that you could not walk on water. No way. And yet, here they saw Jesus walking toward them. And what I think is interesting, Matthew indicates that all of them had seen him. They knew it wasn't a hallucination. They knew that something was coming to them. I can't imagine what they were thinking. And I think Jesus might have actually wanted it that way so he could teach the lesson about who he was. But Peter, good old Peter, the guy who's ready to go all the time, he said, "If it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he got out of the boat when Jesus said, "Come." Command me to come to you. He wanted to come. As I said, it's easy to criticize Peter because a little bit later he took his eyes off Jesus and started to sink. But my question to you, how many of you would have the courage to get out of the boat in the first place? How many of us would have done that? Would you have had the courage just to get out of the boat? You know, when we're really sold out to Jesus Christ, there's going to be times he's going to lead you to take some risk and trust him. He might not ask you to literally get out of a boat, but he might figuratively be doing the same thing. You see, it could be you're led to a new ministry here at Mac. It might be considering the security of a good job to go into full-time ministry, missionary work, such. It could be leaving family or friends for his sake. And folks, all of them are tough. Let's not kid ourselves. Those things are tough. Those things are tough. Let's know something, following Jesus isn't easy. It's not. It's not easy. And when we say, "I love Jesus more than anything," we'd better be ready to realize that there's going to come a time when he might ask you to leave the safety of your boat and risk all for him. That leads us to our third idea this morning, that without Jesus, you're going to sink. Again, look at verses 30 and 31. That's the entire point of this passage, I think. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Peter's walk on the water was short. Why? Because he took his eyes off Jesus. That's simple and straightforward. And the lesson for us is simple and straightforward. When we take our eyes off Jesus, we're going to sink. The storms of life are going to overwhelm us. And I see it all the time. I've been through them myself. I won't go into details here. But thankfully, Jesus will reach out and rescue us when we call to Him. Folks, we can get overwhelmed by temptations, and don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself at all that temptations are harmless and sin is harmless. That's exactly what Satan wants you to believe. It's easy to get overwhelmed. Those small temptations are that first ripple of the sea around you. And they get bigger and bigger until we focus on the storm instead of on the sun. Life can be the same way. And it's easy to forget who's in control. It's easy to forget that. But Jesus said, "No one will pluck my children from my hand." It's easy to forget that. You're going to face storms. It's not a matter of if you face storms. It's a matter of when you're going to face storms. And every one of us are going to do it. I don't know when, and I don't know what it's going to be. I don't even know that for myself. But those storms can destroy you unless you keep your eyes on Jesus Christ. The final thing that I want you to remember this morning is that worship should be our response to Jesus Christ. That's something that is often overlooked in this story. But you look at verses 32 and 33 and look at the last thing that Matthew says about this episode. He says, "And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" That's what matters today. How do you respond to the power of Jesus in the midst of all the storms of life? How do you respond to the power of Jesus? Do you worship Him? You know, if we just hear the story about Peter walking on the water and say, "Wow, that's amazing," if that's where we leave it, then we've missed the boat. When we truly encounter the risen Lord, our response should be to worship Him. But I fear that many times people in our society today have failed to see that. We've lost that response. Modern Christianity has turned this powerful Jesus into someone who's just a miracle worker for my well-being. I fear we've taken our encounters with Jesus from something life-changing to a partial, lip service, nominal commitment to Him. I fear we've made worship into an hour-long time together on Sunday. Then if we're really serious, we'll come back on Wednesday. And if we're really, really serious, during the week we're going to be listening to K-Love or Enlighten or Heaven's Country or some other Christian radio station the rest of the week. Now all those things are good, but you know something? They're superficial. Very superficial. But Paul tells us what true worship really is. I want you to look at what Paul said in Romans chapter 12. When you are to worship Jesus, just as these people worshiped Jesus after he came to the boat, if you encounter Jesus, you worship Him like Paul said. In Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 1, listen what he says. "I appeal to you, brothers, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God." And read those words with me again. "Which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good,